It says, we are disappointed for UFC athletes who are independent contractors who rely on our independent gold standard global program to protect their rights to a clean, safe, and fair octagon. The UFC's move imperils the immense progress made within the sport under USADA's leadership. The relationship between USADA and the UFC became untenable, given the statements made by UFC leaders and others questioning USADA's principled stance that McGregor not be allowed to fight without being in the testing pool for at least 6 months. That is from USADA's CEO, Travis Tigert, who has been in charge of that for a ton of time. Well, now hold on. Now the UFC says they're going to be going a different way. Okay, and this was part of, their whole thing. And I'm not saying that USADA has been perfect. I don't think they have. I think they've done a lot of things that really, in my opinion, are wrong because they don't want to be wrong. And that's a big problem. I think that for you to be fair to the athletes, there's times when the athletes have tested for something that they had no idea they were ingesting something in their body that was against the rules, illegal, whatever you want to say. They have a list of things they can take. They're taking something, and Josh Barnett, look at he tested positive before, but he did test under USADA. He says, "Look, this is what I took." They go and buy that product on the shelf at the store. He has to pay for it, but gives it, USADA takes that, they test it, and it tests for exactly what they popped him for. Now, how's someone supposed to know? And to sit there and now, well, we're going to give you 6 months. Why are you giving that person 6 months? They did nothing knowingly wrong. That's where I had the problem with USADA. There was a point where it's like, you don't want to say that you're wrong, or that someone didn't do anything wrong. You've got to prove that, well, we were right, so you're still going to get some time. That was my one thing that I didn't like with USADA.
They're like exactly like the state athletic commissions. They don't want to be proven wrong.
Yeah.
Athletic commissions are the same way. It drives me fucking nuts. Sorry, guys. I look at it like this is where I have a problem with, and now the UFC is talking about starting their own. The one that's underlined over there. There it is. It says right here, Nowitzki says, Dave's still moving around. Dr. Dan, how do you say his name? Eichner, who runs the SMRTL lab. Smyrtle. Okay. Smyrtle lab.
It's called Smyrtle.
Which has the highest accreditation in anti-doping, will run the UFC's laboratory.
Yeah.
So it will be owned by the UFC.
And they've already hired. They've hired. Well, see, this is the problem. Because, see, they hired, and they just came out saying who they hired, who was the guy who was the, one of the investigators.
Yeah.
A big fucking deal.
Yeah.
One of the investigators was Saddam Hussein. It's like, okay, who's he working for?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he's working for the UFC.
Yeah.
Oh, it's your laboratories. So you're the ones that are in control of it. So you're the ones that can sit there and say, okay, Connor, yes, you don't have to do this. This is what's wrong. At least with USADA, they kept you in check as far as you had to play by their rules. Mm-hmm. Now, you don't like playing by their rules, and so you're going to go into, and you're saying it's independent. It's not independent.
No.
And that's what when you first asked me, I said, this is what I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what they're showing.
And this is what he's showing right now. It says it will run the UFC's laboratory analysis and the science.
Yeah.
Look, we've already seen that they'll bend the rules. The UFC will bend the rules. They will bend the rules for guys like Brock Lesnar to get it passed and for him to fight. They will bend the rules. So they tried to bend the rules for Nate Diaz. They said, look, we're going to bend him a little bit until after the fight, and then we'll deal with it after. And Nate called him out on it. He said, fuck no. We're dealing with this shit right now. You're not going to slander my name. You're not going to fucking hang me out to dry after I've made you your money. Fuck you. And that's where you're going to run into these problems. if you're going to do this, if you're going to come out and say that you're going to be testing all of your fighters, it has to be done independently. This is why promotions don't want to have to deal with this. This is why they let the athletic commissions do it.
That's right.
That being said, I asked you this the other day. I said, say this thing gets the UFC's laboratory test this person positive, and they're on and the fighter's on his last fight with the UFC under contract, and then he gets suspended by the UFC. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a UFC laboratory. That is not the California Commission or the Las Vegas Commission laboratory. So am I really suspended, or can I just tell you to fuck off and go fight somewhere else? Because it's not independent anymore. And so like you were saying that before, the commissions would take the USADA doping and the blood testing in the urine or whatever it was, and they would use their samples, and they would use they would suspend them if they thought, if USADA said it came up with that test.
There were commissions that did. Yes.
Now, will the commissions do this? Because this really is a blurred line right now.
I'm telling you, this might change everything for what the commissions are going to accept. With USADA, when you talk about Smurtle, Smurtle is an organization that does the testing. Mm-hmm. Okay, they're the laboratory that does the testing, and a lot of commissions use them for the testing that they do with athletes. But the problem is, they're the laboratory, but they can only test what's being sent to them. Okay. Mm-hmm. And what's being sent to them is going to be run through the UFC's laboratory and their people working for them. I can't think of the guy's name that they just hired and stuff. Nowitzki will be in charge of him. He'll be in charge of the laboratory. But there's too much now as far as a crossover that the independence of it mm-hmm. is in question.
Yeah,
you got to look at it. If you're not going to question it, then you're just going to say, "Well, the UFC is, they're not going to cheat," and you're going to believe in that. And I'm not saying that. I'm not saying the UFC is trying to cheat.
No,
but I'm saying they're putting themselves in a position where someone can say they're not being fair. They're not doing it the right way.
Well, John, what makes this even more complicated is now that betting is allowed.
Yep.
You can say honestly that you're saying
been allowed for a long.
No, I get what you're saying, but now kids off of their fucking phone can bet. You understand what I'm saying? Like what you're doing is they now are putting themselves in a position to be scrutinized or really looked into by the government, being like, "Hey, you're skewing fights. This fight here, this person, they could have tested positive, but your laboratory said they didn't. He only had picograms. Well, what's your idea of picograms?" I'm just throwing this all out here. Like this, there's a lot of things. This is why I've had this conversation with Scott Coker, because when I first went to Bellator, I was like, "Hey, USADA's over at UFC." And we talked. I said, "Have you ever thought about doing it through WADA? Is it VADA or WADA?"
They're both. You have both. That's the World Anti-Doping Agency and the Voluntary Anti-Doping Agency.
So he had talked about bringing in one of those companies, and he's like, "Look, really, what it comes down to, he's like, now it feels like that I'm having to regulate my fighters." He's like, "Let the commissions do that. That's their job, is to test them, in the middle of camp, and test them, the night of the fight if they feel they need to." He's like, "Once you start bringing that in on you," he's like, "it becomes a problem." He goes, "Then if certain fighters are not getting the test results they get, or like how Yoel Romero and Jessica Penne went through this, obviously, I think for a long period of time, she went through this shit.
Yes, she did.
And she lost 3 years of her career because of this shit. And now it looks like the promotion's doing it to them on purpose when it's not them. At least the independent people are the ones taking the brunt of the argument. Whereas now it's a UFC laboratory. What are you talking about? Maybe your laboratory is not clean. Maybe your laboratory got things mixed up. There's a lot of things.
Now you're talking about cross contamination.
Oh exactly. God. There could be a ton of things, and they didn't want me to fight. Or now this just leads more into that whole Dana privilege. They don't like me. Dana doesn't like it. It gets real foggy here, John. And it's not that I'm saying that they want to do these things. It just that can give the perception that the UFC is controlling who makes it to the top, which fighters they like get there. And if someone's having contract, especially when someone's having contract problems,
That's the real problem.
when someone's having contract problems and all of a sudden they tested positive. I know I didn't take anything. I've been taking the same shit for the last, 6-7 years. Fuck no. It ends up getting complicated.
It does. It can. You've created a situation, and this is why the UFC stepped away. They did that whole thing from the fights in Macau. Mm-hmm. Rich Franklin against Kung Lee, I think, was the fight that was.
Yeah.
They caught Kung Lee, said he pissed dirty, and then Kung came back, and it's like, well, and there was no doubt. Look, you take a look at the pictures. I love Kung, but he was putting out pictures of. I mean, he had veins coming out of his waist, and all of a sudden, it's like, Kung,
40-something years old. Yeah.
What the hell? Yeah.
You didn't think about this before you did it?
There's just some things that just don't happen based upon, age and being in shape and stuff. You can sit there and say, "Oh, I've changed my diet." Yes, you did.
No, yeah, it's called a science diet, by the way.
Yeah. Well, there is a science diet. It's for dogs, and if you take it, you're gonna get ripped like a motherfucker.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
But that was the reason they went to USADA, and you looked at it and you go, "Man, I understand, and it's smart." And now, it's all, I don't want to say it's all based upon the one fighter, but it's a control of when they can use somebody. They don't want somebody saying, well, no, he's got to be in this program for so long and you can't use him because that person is a moneymaker. And it just doesn't look, the optics are bad.
Yeah, they are. They're extremely bad right now for this. But just like everything else, the dust will settle, and the media, if they want access, will kowtow to the UFC and let them free on this. And that's just the way it works. I mean, they understand. Look, they want credentials. They want to get into the shows. They want to be able to write about it. They want to be able to not be scrutinized by Dana up on the platform after every event. And so they're going to do what they're told. That's what the media does. They're going to do what they're told. And I like that Bronstetter came out and he underlined that it was the UFC's laboratory that will be doing the testings run by so-and-so and so-and-so. All those things are great. But like I said, where you're going to run into the problems is when you have any type of problem with a fighter, whether they're being disobedient, they don't like Dana, they talk about Dana privilege, they do any of this, or the contract isn't what they want, or when they ask for more money, they get busted, or if they end up getting tested hot. Careful, because like it just there's a blurred line. Now you run the organization and you hold my contract, and now you're testing me to see if I'm breaking any rules. And you mix that along with the code of conduct stuff. I mean, there's fines that can be slapped on you. There's penalty. Like, do you start slapping fines on the people for testing positive? Now how the NFL and all the other people do? Now you're garnishing my money and not making me fight, or not giving me a fight. There's a lot, man. There's a lot that can be involved in this. It's scary. It's a scary situation. This is why Coker had said plenty of times, we stay out of it. We let the commissions do it.
Yeah.
So there's no lines that are blurred.
100% agree. Look,